There we go. Now we're really getting going. We are really getting going. Screw it, let's get started. Alright. Hello and welcome everyone to the House Ep1, the redo. I know what you're thinking, why the hell are you redoing episode 1, B? It's a good question. The answer is because I didn't record any of my episodes of the Doghouse. I know what you're thinking. You fucking idiot. You didn't record your podcast? Well, I'm doing it now, so calm down. Alright, let me pause this Christmas music before people get angry. So, in episode 1 of this Doghouse podcast, we went over PC building. Now, the PC building community is, from what I can tell, pretty big. And taking it from someone who works in IT, who's built a computer before, it's not as hard as everybody thinks. Some people like to equate it to adult Legos. I would say that's somewhat accurate. Yeah, that is somewhat accurate. It is adult Legos. It's a little more expensive than Legos. At least it can be. Or it may not be, depending on where you shop. But since I can't really show you how to build a PC myself because I don't have the equipment I need, and I don't have the money to get said equipment, because I'm a broke boy, I'm going to show you first how not to build a computer. And to help me with that, we have The Verge and my man Stefan.
So a few years ago,
Oh wait, before I forget, a little context of this video. This came out 2 years ago in September. I think it actually came out September 13th, which is my sister's birthday. It came out that day. And, like I said, this video was filled with a ton of misinformation on PC building. So much so that The Verge actually ended up taking it down because people were, kind of calling them out for this shit. And you're going to see why they had to take this video down and why people were going after him. Well, not going after him, but you know what I mean.
PC or managing editor built a gaming desktop, but it's kind of out of date.
Why? That's something I really don't get. Why Capital One? Like, I could understand ASUS, AMD, Intel, but Capital freaking One? That makes no sense. No sense.
Date, and it's definitely not going to hold up for Battlefield 5. So let's build a new one.
Alright.
You can build a gaming desktop for around $1,000, but I want to go all out, so I spent around $2,000.
Okay. First things first. That's technically a half-truth. Yeah, certain PC builds can get up to $1,000, but you can even build one for way less than that. And $2,000, yeah, decent chunk of change for a decent PC. But I also want to remind you, this is 2 years ago.
PC like this is going to be able to play most games at ultra settings.
Yeah, 2 years
ago. What do you
ago.
need to build a desktop? Well, of course, first you need a table.
The fact that he has to say that is ridiculous. Yeah, you kind of need a flat surface to work on. I mean, that's kind of a... Hey, wait a minute. I have this exact knife.
Preferably not metal. If it's going to be metal, have an anti-static working surface.
Do they really make metal tables? Because I've never seen metal tables. Number one.
Layered on top of it, a thermal paste applicator.
You don't need
an
that.
Allen wrench.
Don't need that.
Some tweezers to tighten up the wires.
Zip
a Swiss
ties,
Army knife, which
okay.
hopefully has a Phillips head screwdriver in it.
Again, I have that exact same knife, I'm pretty sure. Huh, there it is. I'm holding it right now. And no, just get a regular screwdriver,
And last but not least, an anti-static bracelet, which is to protect you and the parts. These are the parts you're...
That is not an anti-static bracelet. Matter of fact, give me 1 second. Let me show you what an son of a bitch. Static bracelet. Here we go. This is what they look like. Notice how this is Velcro and not elastic? That's just a rubber band on his wrist. Jesus Christ. And I actually have one of these. They're pretty useful. They're not essential, but they're useful. Okay, back to this dumpster fire.
You're going to need. But more importantly, before we get there, we need to understand what these parts are doing and how they interact with one another. To better understand the parts that make up a desktop, let's try to understand them individually.
Okay.
The processor is like the computer's brain, a base of calculations that control everything the computer does.
Very true.
The motherboard is like the foundation, serving as a main structure for all other parts to be added to.
Okay.
It also allows the other parts to communicate with one another, which also makes it kind of like a nervous system. Graphics cards are responsible for rendering and processing visuals into what you see on screen.
Right.
Our PC's power supply is, of course, channeling electricity, in that it adjusts and provides the right amount of energy to keep it running.
Right.
Last but not least, RAM, or random access memory, and your hard drive are good examples of short-term and long-term memory, respectively.
Okay.
If you want to better understand what kind of computer to build, then first figure out what you want to use it for. A gamer might care more about a graphics card than, say, a video editor, who might want extra RAM to assist with editing large files.
Okay, here's where he's going wrong. He's not entirely wrong in saying that, yeah, you could use a lot of RAM. The problem is you're also going to need a high-end graphics card, especially if you're video editing and gaming. You're going to need a high-end graphics card and a CPU that can keep up with it. Because if you have a low-end CPU with a high-end graphics card, it's going to affect your performance, and you're going to get what's called bottlenecking. And you don't want that.
If you're building a budget build for video streaming, say under $1,000, you want to focus on parts like a Core i5 or Core i3 processor.
Don't get a Core i3 to watch YouTube videos. Get an i5. It's a better value.
That require less energy.
Yeah, the i3 is cheaper, but it's not. It's going to be very limited.
They'll be less powerful, but then you'll be able to scale back the cost of several other parts. And if you need help choosing the right parts for your build, there's sites like PCPartPicker.com that help show presets for which parts fit together, which sort of part conflicts you might have, and where to find deals on new parts.
Okay, good on him for recommending PC Part Picker. I kind of used it to spec out my computer.
We have a lot of boxes and a lot of PC parts, so it's best you unbox them, isolate the parts that you...
Wait, go back. Go back.
We have a lot of boxes and a lot of PC parts, so it's best you unbox them, isolate the parts...
Damn, he tore the shit out of that box.
You really need, place items into the case and make sure that they all fit, and then start working. Okay. And now we're really going to start building by adding the motherboard in. Some notes about installing motherboards: they're really delicate, you should be really careful with them. And screw in with confidence, but also don't screw in too hard, otherwise you could crack the board.
Yeah, I suppose. I wouldn't use his wording. You know how he said, like, screw in with confidence? I would just say screw in wrist tight. That way you don't strip the screws. The motherboard's not going to crack unless you, like, break it over your knee or something. Don't do that. Please don't do that.
Asus's Z370 motherboard for two main reasons. One, it has built-in Wi-Fi and Bluetooth, and also it has support for NVMe SSDs, meaning you can get really fast SSDs that are really easy to install.
Okay.
Pay close attention to the brace that goes at the back of the computer. You always have to make sure that you really hammer it in, because...
Alright, it's called an I/O shield, first of all. Second of all, do not hammer it in, for God's sakes. That's how you dent things. Just use your thumbs. God gave us thumbs for a reason, people.
There's no screw. It really just has to go outside of the case and clasp onto the frame. And this is very important because otherwise you can't align the motherboard correctly with the holes. We're just going to start installing all 8 screws.
Okay. Another thing. You didn't install the CPU first. Usually before you put the motherboard in the case, you want to put the CPU in first because you have more room to put it in. Because if you like hit your hand against the case, you're going to drop the thing and bend the pins, and you don't want that. Especially if you're using an AMD where the pins are on the freaking chip. You don't want that. Also, you didn't install the RAM either. And we're going to get to the RAM later. We'll mention that later. Don't worry.
So next we're going to install the RAM on the motherboard. I chose Corsair's 16GB Vengeance LED RAM for two main reasons. One, it has...
I would have gone Ripjaws because they're usually... You get a better performance for the price, but... Whatever.
LEDs, and we do like lights in our gaming desktops.
I'm indifferent.
Secondly, it's pretty fast RAM. It's 2,666 megahertz, I believe. So it's pretty fast, and this motherboard supports that speed.
Bruh. Bruh. 2666 megahertz is not fast. Not for DDR4. For DDR3, okay. Not for DDR4. But, again, what do I know?
Which is most important.
What do I know?
Open the slots first, and just aligning the stick with the middle of the strip.
Use both hands, dude.
And just lining that up with the logo. So once you hear that solid clasp and you don't see the gold connectors on the side anymore, that's when you know the RAM is in. Step 3, we're going to install the hard drive. Or in this case...
Son of a bitch. Hang on. You can't see it, but... Because this stupid thing is in the way. But you notice how his RAM's close to each other? They're like...
NVMe SSD. I chose this format of solid-state drive so that I could input it into the motherboard with...
Screw it. I'll just work around it. So you can't really see it from this angle. I'll probably go forward in the video a little more. But the RAM is next to each other. That is no bueno. Especially if you're trying to use dual channel, which he's trying to do. In some motherboards, if you put the RAM in like this, it's not gonna open. It's not gonna power on. Luckily, if I remember correctly, this motherboard doesn't have that problem. But what will happen is that it's not going to show 16 gigs, it's going to show 8. And that's going to really put a cap on his performance.
Without having to worry about extra wires or putting it in a separate part of the case and just getting really messy.
Okay.
This is from Kingston, and it's 480 gigabytes, so it's not a lot, but you can always upgrade this and swap it out, and it's only held down.
Okay, that's not entirely true. 480 gigs for a boot drive is pretty good. It's usually pretty good. For like storing games, okay, fine. But for a boot drive, that's pretty good.
By one screw and the latch, so it's really simple and really straightforward. Speed for gaming is important when it comes to a hard drive. You want files to write quickly, and you want games to load quickly. So that's why it's best if you use an SSD.
Depends on the game, but mostly he's right. In some cases, some games perform better on SSDs, but most of them perform fine on spinning drives.
Okay, so step 4, we're going to install the graphics card. I chose PNY's GTX 1080, which is overclocked. And so it's a pretty easy installation. You're just going to find the gold connectors. And you're going to line this bracket with the back end.
Hang on.
The gold connectors.
See what I mean? That's not supposed to be like that.
And you're going to line this bracket with the back end bracket of your PC case. Now, which lane you choose depends entirely on what other parts you're going to put in the system. I'm just going to pick the top one because the SSD is at the bottom and I don't want to cover it. I just think it looks nice.
Okay, that's incorrect. You choose the top one because usually it's going to offer you the most bandwidth, or it's going to let you use your graphics card to its fullest potential. You put it in one of those other slots, which is usually like half the... Trust me, it'll cut the performance in half, and you'll be sitting there wondering, why the hell is my graphics card not performing to its potential? Because you put it in the wrong slot like an idiot. But I will say he's not entirely wrong about not wanting to cover his SSD.
Click down.
Okay.
Take your remaining brackets and just put them in the spots that you haven't used. You don't have to screw these in. They get bolted down by the back end bracket. And your GPU's installed.
Depends on the case, but in this instance, it's right.
I chose Corsair's 850 watt power supply because I need enough headroom for ray tracing GPUs when they come out, and I don't want to have to upgrade it again.
Okay. Yeah, I won't give him shit for this, because I kind of did the same thing with mine. Mainly because graphics cards are the ones that usually take up a lot of power from the power supply. Plus, the power supply doesn't stay at that volt. It doesn't stay at its rated voltage forever. It'll wear down over time. He could have gotten away with a 650, but he's not entirely wrong for using an 850, in my opinion. Granted, I think he overspent a little bit.
So all you have to do is take the brick and make sure that you align it with these little insulating pads so the power supply doesn't short circuit and come into contact with the rest of the system.
That is not going to happen because the power supply is designed so that doesn't happen unless you open it. Please don't open it, you damn fool. Oh, Jesus.
So just take it in, slide it in nice and easy until you have a snug fit, and then shift it to the back and make sure it's right up against the...
Ugh. Oh no, baby. What you doing? You're not supposed to put it in like that. You're gonna... I'll show you why. Hang on. Notice, I don't know if you could see it from here, but his motherboard is there. So...
the system frame.
So, if he puts it in like that, the fan is going to be facing the motherboard. That fan on the power supply, what do you call it? It intakes hot air, cold air, and exhausts hot air out of it. So what that means is, this is not getting any airflow, and it's going to choke. When it chokes, that's how it degrades. That's how you degrade it faster. He's going to replace that in like a week or two and be like, yo, what the hell happened to this thing?
And then shift it to the back and make sure it's right up against the frame.
Oh man, that's going to
Now
overheat.
you just take the required screws and you tighten and screw in. So next step, we're going to install the CPU core. In this case, it's going to go on the top end of the case, and we're just going to have the hose hang out for a little while until we install the processor, which is going to come a little later.
You should have done that first. Oh boy.
Always be sure to try to place it in the system first.
You didn't put fans on this thing, man. Come on. You got to put fans on that. Like, you can't passively cool these kind of CPUs. Especially like an AMD CPU, those things run hot like a motherfucker.
First, before you install it, because you can see it takes up a lot of space. But in this case, no pun intended, it fits in perfectly.
Whoa, that wasn't funny.
And we're going to start screwing it in. And so there's nothing special about this screwing in process. They're just really long screws because they go through the entire frame of the cooler. And they take forever.
Because they're the wrong screws. Those are for you to connect the fans to the motherboard. Not to the motherboard, to the fans to the radiator. You doing what you're doing now, you're going to puncture a hole in that thing. And you're going to get fluid everywhere. On your fancy freaking components that cost you $2,000. Jesus, man. Good thing he's got this silly ass bracelet on. Or he'd be really dumb.
So next up, cables. Every power supply is going to come with a big bag of Velcro cables.
No, it won't. No, it won't. It depends on the power supply. There are 3 types of power supplies. There's modular, which, yeah, do come with a bag of cables. There's semi-modular, and then there's non-modular. Non-modular will not come with cables because the cables are already on there. So, yeah.
It's kind of daunting at first, so you always have to find the ones that are going to fit. In this case, you need to match those cables with the correct descriptions on the power supply.
Also, you usually want to put the cables on the power supply first. It makes doing this a little easier. I mean, he's lucky because he has a decent case, but if he had like the case I'm rocking right now,
next step is we're connecting the power supply to the motherboard with a 24-pin cable. We're just matching that cable from the motherboard, threading it through the back, and attaching the 24-pin header to the power supply so that we can have one of the connections complete. The next few additions will be for the GPU, for any specific ports that the case has, for any lighting that the case has, the CPU cooler, anything else really.
You're not going to show us how to do that? I mean, come on, man. This is supposed to be a tutorial. Let's be realistic. I don't know how to do that. Well, I do, but for argument's sake, let's say I don't know how to do that. If I'm following this tutorial, I'm going to be sitting there thinking to myself, what do I do? How do I plug all that stuff in? I mean, come on, man.
We're installing the CPU, the heart of the computer or the brain, depending on how you look at it.
You mentioned it was the brain at the beginning of the video. Now you're contradicting yourself. Come on.
So to do this, we're just going to remove the plastic covering that they put on the motherboard. I'm just going to take this little plastic part out. Just toss that out of here.
Don't do that. Jesus. You need that, man. Like, if something happens to that motherboard that you have to send it back, and you don't have that little covering on there that you just tossed like you were fucking... like you fucking yeeted. I need to go back to that.
I'm just going to take this little plastic part out.
Yo!
Just toss that out of here.
You fucking yeeted that thing. Like Luke yeeted his lightsaber in The Last Jedi. Come on. Yeah, but you do need that, because if you don't have that thing on the motherboard when you send it back, they're gonna send it back to you and say they're not gonna fix it. That's how you avoid a warranty.
Now we have an exposed CPU holder, or rather slot, on the motherboard.
It's a socket,
and
bro.
We're going to use the CPU applicator. This is a special little part that not everyone may get, but this motherboard that we got from ASUS definitely does have.
For the love of God, if you ever get one of these, leave it in the motherboard box. You don't need it. Installing a CPU is so simple. It's extremely simple. You gotta be careful, but it's fairly easy. Damn it!
It's called the CPU installation tool. It makes it really useful if you want to install a Core i7 hexa-core CPU. Yeah, we've got one, and it's an 8th generation chip.
Why is he bragging like he's got fucking the new Threadripper? Or like a new graphics card? Or like the 30 series cards? Like, that's not that impressive. Like, you can find that anywhere now. Like, if this is when these things were selling out like crazy, okay, but they're not selling out like crazy anymore, so don't know what the hell you're bragging about.
And it's ready to go, and it supports overclocking. So what
you better not overclock, my dude. Yeah, you can get more performance. Honestly, I don't recommend anybody overclocks, because, again, if you break your components due to your overclocking, they're not going to fix it. Most manufacturers will not fix them for you.
Having this little installer does for you is it's basically a brace that you can apply right to the CPU and light it up with the triangles that you'll see on the bottom left corners. And
damn it, I keep doing that.
This will make it easier for us to apply it to the motherboard.
I'm all over the place
apply
today.
thermal paste and then apply a CPU cooler on top. And we're just going to carefully...
No. Another thing, do not push. Do not press the CPU into the socket. Just place it in there. Give it a little wiggle to make sure it's securely in there. And then you close the thing. You don't have to push it. It doesn't need pressure. That's how you bend the pins in there. Fuck, man.
To the system and make sure that everything lines up. And we're going to clasp down on it and we'll be good.
Speaking of which, you put the damn thing away. You didn't even need it. I feel like halfway through he felt like, yeah, this is pointless.
Yeah.
Oh no.
So we're about to apply thermal paste to the CPU.
Oh no. Oh, prepare yourselves, my friends. It's about to get bad.
Every CPU cooler actually comes with a bit of thermal paste already neatly applied in a circle around it.
Not really, but for argument's sake, let's say he's right.
But it's usually not enough. It's good, essentially, PC building.
It's fine. It is fine. It's not the most ideal thing to use, but it gets the job done. If you're using like Threadripper, yeah, you're probably going to need to be a little more generous. But overall, this is fine. This is more than okay. So I don't know what the hell he's talking about.
Practice to have a little bit extra and layer it on top of the CPU.
Also, he's applying it completely wrong.
The final portion is to add the CPU cooler to the top end of the processor. So you're going to see that there are four brackets, or rather screws in here, brackets and orders.
No. Yo. It looked like he busted a nut all over the IHS, man. What the fuck? Yo, what kind of porn were you watching when you were doing this? Jesus. That thing is gonna seep on into the socket and ruin the socket, man.
Right here.
Ugh.
And they're going to keep the cooler raised off the processor, but it's also going to be close enough to actually physically come in contact with it, like basically keep it cool. Take those screws like this and just screw them on.
What did I say? Remember what I said about that whole, you're supposed to show us how to do it? How am I supposed to know how to do what you're doing if I can't see what you're doing? Like, my God, man, they really screwed this video up. Thank God I got taken down.
So now that our internals are done, we're going to put all the panels back on, which is the top glass, side glass, front glass, and
well, you aren't done. You forgot to show us a whole bunch of stuff, but whatever.
Of course, the back panel where all this fun stuff.
Oh, Jesus Christ.
So we fully built the PC.
Go back.
All this fun stuff is happening. So we fully built...
Listen, man. Listen. I know my cable management isn't that great. Granted, in my defense, I have a shitty case. He has a fairly decent one. And he can't... And this is the best he can do. Come on.
The PC, everything is put together, and we got to the post screen.
Bull fucking shit.
So what's next? Well, you need a USB flash drive with your Windows installation media on it, and of course a license key.
Well, you don't necessarily need a license key for Windows nowadays. There are so many ways you can get license keys for free. But I'm not going to get into that.
So I plugged that up, installed Windows in a couple of minutes, installed...
It does not take a couple of minutes. You have to have really good internet for that to happen.
A bunch of drivers.
Also, a bunch of drivers, nah. At the most, you'll probably need like 5 or 6. And they usually don't take that long. Especially when you have an SSD.
And now we have a fully functioning gaming PC ready to run some games.
You know one thing I do want to see. Is he going to open up like Task Manager and show that he only has like 8 gigs of RAM instead of 16? Can we see that, please?
Right now I've got Armor 3 running at maximum settings, native resolution, which is 1080p HD, and it's running pretty smoothly. Like, I'm averaging 70 and 80 FPS, and this is normally like a very intensive game to run, and it's still doing a pretty good job.
He's not entirely
So right now I'm playing League of Legends. It's one of my favorite games. I'm actually playing against a bot.
Bro, what? Ugh. Is he really benchmarking League? That game is not built for benchmarking, dude. It's not that intensive. Like, the crappiest of gaming laptops can run that game. Jesus.
And I'm distracted.
Hell, a freaking Chromebook could probably run that game.
So I'm not actually doing so well. But otherwise, like, this is pretty much what you would see me do on a gaming computer. Test stuff out, and hopefully have really high frame rates like I am right now. I'm averaging 120 FPS, and that's only because I've actually locked the game.
Now why would you do that? You're supposed to be benchmarking. In benchmarking, you're not supposed to lock anything, dude.
To that frame rate, because I can get around 300 FPS playing League on maximum settings.
Which you're probably not going to see on this monitor because it's probably 60 hertz.
Which is a little bit absurd, and you don't really need that, so I locked it.
Well,
Building a gaming desktop has been a great experience. I'm able to max out a lot of my favorite titles, and I'll be able to play a lot of upcoming titles like Battlefield 5 and Cyberpunk 2077.
Ironically, the latter is coming out next week. And you, trust me, after Battlefield 5, you probably don't want to play it. Have you seen how bad that game was?
Without worrying too much about the parts I have, when ray tracing GPUs come out, for example, I'll be able to upgrade without having to buy a completely new system, and
well, that depends on a lot
if
of
I have a
factors
problem
again.
down the line, I can always just swap out the part and have it serviced rather than using my whole computer. And of course now we also have a computer to test and benchmark games here at The Verge.
Alright. Again, why? Why? Alright. You know what? People? I think we should do each other a favor. I'm going to show you how to properly build a computer. But, like I said, I don't have the equipment I need, so I'm going to do it a different way. Oh, Jesus. God damn it. There we go. Hey! There we go. Esports DLC. Let's free build. I'm going to show you guys how to properly build a computer. Before I do that, hang on. Bear with me, I've kind of completely forgotten how to play this game. Alright. Motherboards. Let's see. Alright, you know what? Probably not going to work out. Sorry, guys. Tell you what, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to show you guys how... Since I unfortunately cannot show you how to build a PC, give me 1 second. I'm going to show you someone who actually knows how to build a computer. Oh, let's skip all this BS.
Chris, the objective of this build, push-pull, or the Pure Base 600 from B, pair of powerful core info. What's cracking?
There we go.
The channel. Hope you're all doing well. Today we are building a full-blown system from the ground up. The objective of the build is going to be so that theoretically, those of you who might be building a system of your own at home can assemble it almost in real time as you watch me build mine. And so this is really just to help those of you who are maybe new to PC building.
What does it say? I say real time loosely, you'll have to pause the video often. Well, that's kind of a no-brainer.
Build mine. And so this is really just to help those of you who are maybe new to PC building, if it's your first time, or if you just need a refresher on how to assemble this stuff. So hopefully that...
Well, me, I know what I'm doing, but I'm doing this for the audience. Because I love my audience. You guys are the best.
That makes sense, and it's going to be a lengthier video because of that. It's just more of a casual and relaxed environment to teach users or new users how to build a PC. I will say that even if you're not building a Ryzen system, so I'm building an AMD Ryzen PC, even if you're building an Intel-based computer, you can still apply 95% of what I'm going to be doing today to your system. It doesn't really matter. The only real differences are the CPU installation, which is a breeze on either platform, and CPU cooler installation, which in itself can vary greatly even on the same platform depending on which manufacturer of cooler you're going with.
That's true.
That being said, ladies and gentlemen, am I just building this computer just for you guys? No, of course not. This is actually going to be my cousin's gaming PC that I helped him assemble, or that I helped him pick out the parts for. I actually did a video, you can go ahead and check that out, where I sort of make a parts list, and that parts list looks drastically different from the hardware you see before me, because I went back to the drawing board several times and was like, no, that doesn't make sense. That's stupid. So I've swapped it out from, it was originally going to be an Intel system, and now it's AMD Ryzen. What do you know? It just seemed to make more sense with his budget.
Yeah, usually Ryzen's better for budget when it comes to budgets. again, like I mentioned, these Ryzen chips do run really, really hot.
Stuff. For those of you curious,
So you may need to get an aftermarket
is around
cooler.
$1,200 MSRP.
Better safe
give or
than
take
sorry.
$100 or so, depending on the prices, how they fluctuate all the time and stuff. But let's go ahead and go over the parts, shall we? One by one. I'm going to do it really quick because we've got a lot of building to do right afterwards. So first off, our CPU of the hour is the Ryzen 5 1600. It's a 6-core, 12-thread part. Boosts up to 3.6 gigahertz. I am going to try to push that a bit further with a manual overclock for Brandon. He's not into overclocking. He's not too familiar with it, so I'm going to try to squeeze the most performance out.
Isn't it ironic that Kyle's cousin has the same name as I do? Jesus.
Out of it as I can, with the help of this cooler. Now, this was originally the cooler that Brandon bought and paid for. Is this one right here. This is the CryoRig H7, a really great price-performance cooler. However, I forgot to tell Brandon to also pick up or order an AM4 bracket to go along with it because it doesn't come with one, so it's not supported with Ryzen natively out of the box. So it's going to take probably a few weeks for that bracket to get here. So in the meantime, we're using this Noctua NH U12S. Fantastic cooler. Brandon can decide if he wants to keep this one or swap it out for the H7 once the bracket arrives and that sort of thing. So that takes care of that. We've also got a B350 Tomahawk motherboard from MSI. This is a fantastic little budget board. I believe that this is one of the ones that has a PLX chip, so it supports Crossfire and all that jazz. It's really nice, sort of a black and red color scheme. Actually, the red is very subtle on the VRM heatsinks. Probably shouldn't clash with anything else in the rig, but fantastic little board here that is going to be paired with the GTX 1070 Superclock Edition from good old EVGA. This is still, I think, one of the more affordable 1070s that you can find on the market. However, it's a blazing fast card, and it's certainly...
I will say, EVGA does have some pretty decent graphics cards and
pretty
good power supplies too.
System. The memory kit, I almost forgot about that down there. It's a 16 gigabyte kit. Where'd you get that 18 gigabyte kit from? 16 gig kit of G.Skill Ripjaws 5 DDR4 at 3000 megahertz. I am also going to try to overclock that to 3200, as that does help Ryzen in gaming performance some. Hopefully the G350 Tomahawk here is able to handle that.
G.Skills
Our
is pretty good.
configuration consists of 2 drives, the first of which being a 250 gig WD Blue. That's actually an SSD, not a mechanical hard drive like you might have thought at first. Yeah, WD makes friggin' SSDs now, and they actually call them the same name as their mechanical drives, which is super confusing. But nonetheless, this should be a pretty sweet SSD. I've never used it before personally or tested it, so hopefully it works and it's fast enough. And we've got a 1 terabyte WD Black mechanical hard drive for his for all the games and stuff. Obviously, the heavy storage needs, media, that sort of thing. I should mention that we are installing Windows 10 64-bit on that SSD as well. We've got the Seasonic G Series 650 watt power supply. This is a modular unit and 80 plus gold certified, yo. So incredibly powerful SSD as well. We've got the Seasonic G Series 650 watt power supply. This is a modular unit and 80 plus gold certified, yo. So incredibly power efficient. And it's also, what was I going to say? It's a Seasonic. Seasonic is a great power supply brand. They are very reputable. So hopefully this one will handle this this particular system just fine. And then finally, our case of the hour is the NZXT S340 Elite in white. I gave Brandon a couple options. He really wanted a white case, so I gave him this one along with like 3 or 4 other popular white cases. And this is the one he came out with. Was like, this is the one. This one right here. And I completely agree. I love this case myself. I've built a couple systems in it already. It's got a beautiful tempered glass side panel. It's got radiator support at the front in case he wants to upgrade the cooling solution later down the line. And it's just a really nice chassis for not too much money. And then finally, just to give ourselves a little bit of an aesthetic bump for the rig, I have included some Fantex white sleeved extension cables to make things look nice and pretty. Oh, there's one more thing. As a thank you to Brandon for letting me build his rig and film it on the channel, I am throwing in, free of charge, an NZXT Hue Plus RGB LED unit, which is probably the biggest, baddest, most awesome RGB accessory you can add to a system here in 2017. So that's going to definitely spice things up and add some bling. Definitely going to give us a bling factor for today's build. But those are all the parts, ladies and gentlemen. So I'm done rambling. I'm going to go ahead and start building. So if you guys, those of you who are building your own systems at home right now, what I'm going to suggest is that you grab your CPU, aka your desktop processor, and your main board or your motherboard. because that's generally where I like to start in a given build. So let's start there. All right, y'all. So you can see that I've taken the CPU somewhat out of its packaging. You want to make sure not to touch it unless you absolutely have to, so it's still sort of in a little box for now. But I've also removed the motherboard from its anti-static sleeve. And you'll notice that there's a bunch of other stuff on this table. I'm going to go over everything. But when you take your motherboard out of its box, you want to also take out a few important accessories along with it so that they're just on hand when you're ready for them. The first of which is your motherboard I/O shield. And we're going to see what this exactly is for in just a bit, as well as your SATA cables. I would take out a number of SATA cables equivalent to the number of 2.5-inch or 3.5-inch drives that you'll be connecting to your system. So in our instance, we've got 2 drives, one SSD and one mechanical hard drive. So I've actually pulled out all 4 of the cables since they come connected. But you can take those out as well, and then your motherboard manual. So this is the Tomahawk manual. You might need to consult it at some point. And then the other stuff on here, these are just sort of like tools that I use when building a computer. The only one you absolutely need, well, let me get the CPU out of here. That's not a tool, really. So we've got the one you really need is a screwdriver. You need a Phillips head screwdriver. This is a number 2 Phillips head screwdriver. Any sort of length will do, but I generally prefer a slightly longer one. Woohoo! Just makes it a little bit easy when screwing in screws and stuff. But magnetic tip also helps a lot. Not required, but definitely appreciated. Makes things a bit easier. And then we've also got some cable management accessories here. So zip ties. Generally, there's at least one or 2 components in your build that will come with zip ties, but they're usually very few of them, and they're not like the right length, or they're too cheap and stuff like that. So I have my own on hand. Again, this is not necessary, just kind of creates a cleaner build for the cable management part. And then I've got some Velcro ties in case I need them. And then, of course, some wire cutters to cut the zip ties and stuff. A pair of scissors also works just as fine. Don't use a knife, that can be dangerous. So those are the things that we are going to be using for this build. And on that note, we can actually install our CPU. All right, so here's a close-up look at our CPU socket. And this is basically where the CPU gets physically mounted or inserted on the motherboard. And this one in particular is the AM4 socket. AM4 is only compatible with AMD Ryzen CPUs, at least at the time of filming. So don't bother putting in a non-Ryzen AMD chip or an Intel chip, God forbid. Bad things will happen if you do. So just stick to Ryzen for AM4 and you'll be good to go. So if you are building an Intel rig right now, I would suggest going to some sort of tutorial. Maybe I'll link one. I'll put a card somewhere if I can find a good tutorial on how to do that on the Intel platform. But for ZIF sockets for Ryzen, it's really quite simple. All you do is lift up this bar here. There's a little bar that's got a little latch. You kind of got to push it to the side a little bit and then lift it up like so. And then get your CPU out. I will remind you guys not to leave any fingerprints on your CPU, particularly on the top. You don't want to touch this top heat spreader here. That's a no-no. You want to grab it from the sides. So here's the CPU, all right? You can grab the edges. Edges are fine. Also, do not touch the golden contacts, the golden pins, I should say, on the bottom. All right, that's a no-no as well. That's very important. You want to keep that as clean as possible. The way you want to do this now is you want to take note of the golden triangle. There's a golden triangle on one of the corners of the CPU. And you want to match that with the small, tiny-ass triangle in the corner of the socket. You can see there's a tiny little corner, or I'm sorry, yeah, a little arrow right in the corner there. That's going to match up with the gold arrow on your CPU. So the way you want to do this is grab it with one hand, one finger on each side. I use my thumb and my index, and you just go straight down into the socket. You'll notice that the pins, you have pins on the bottom and you have pin holes in the socket. So obviously you're going to be slotting all those pins into all those holes, and it should just drop down. It should feel snug. It should feel like it's in there, and you can give it a little wiggle to make sure that it's fully down. Looks good. And then you take the lever and you just push it back to where it was. There will be a little bit of pressure. Don't let it scare you though. And once the lever locks back into place, voila, you've just installed a CPU.
I'm still
now,
on
some CPUs,
mute.
including
Jesus
the one that we're
Christ.
using today, come included with a stock cooler.
I'm such an idiot.
And this one in particular comes with the AMD Wraith Spire, which is a fantastic stock cooler, but we're using something a little bit better. We're
No,
using
it's
that Noctua cooler that I mentioned earlier at the beginning of the video.
No, it's not. That thing sucks, I'm sorry.
So we actually don't need these mounting bars.
That
These
thing
mounting
didn't
bars
last me
on
like a
either side of the
month
socket, those are
before I
for
had to replace
the
it.
stock cooler, but we don't need those. We want to make way for the Noctua cooler bracket. So we're going to actually remove these by unscrewing each of the screws. There's 2 screws on either side. And upon removing them, the mounting bracket should pop off just like that. Do the same thing for the other side. So we are going to want to keep the AM4 backplate in place because that's how we're going to mount our third-party air cooler here. And this is where things get a little tricky because there's no standard method for installing CPU coolers. It all sort of differs based on the manufacturer. This Noctua cooler installation will be vastly different than an NZXT cooler versus a Thermaltake cooler versus a Fantex cooler, a Corsair cooler, and so forth. So this is really the only part in the build where I'm going to have to leave you guys on your own, I promise. So at this point, I want you to consult the manual that came with your air cooler or liquid cooler and follow it to a T. Follow the instructions there, and you should be good to go. Make sure that you're also following the instructions in that manual that pertain to your particular socket. So again, we're running AM4 right here. If you're using LGA 1155 with Intel or LGA 2011, then you want to make sure that you're reading the right instructions for that socket. But before I let you go and off to your own installation with the cooler, I will teach you how to apply thermal paste. And it's fairly simple. Thermal paste is basically a thermal interface material that basically is a heat conductor between the heat spreader of the CPU and the base plate of your cooler. It basically allows for heat transfer between your CPU and the cooler so that you get better absorption, better dissipation, and superior thermals. If you don't use thermal paste, you're going to have a bad day. You always, always, always want to use a proper application of thermal paste. So what you want to do, I have a little plunger here. Yours probably looks a little similar. I like to do the grain of rice method. So straight in the middle, it's just how it sounds. You want a grain of rice size of thermal paste. You can go a little bit bigger. I would say grain of rice works for LGA 1151, for example, and similar, because it's a smaller chip, and you don't really need that much. Ryzen's slightly bigger of a heat spreader, so we're gonna do the green pea method. The green pea method is slightly bigger than the grain of rice. Bada bing, bada boom. Beautiful. All right, and ideally, the theory here is that once you push this thing down, once you smack it down on the CPU, it's just going to spread it across the entire heat spreader, and so you'll actually get much fuller coverage than what it looks like right now. So on that note, why don't you go ahead and install your CPU cooler while I install mine, and we'll meet back afterwards. Sound good? All right, go for it. Good luck. I believe in you. All right, moving on to the memory. So installing
the memory is also
is one
fairly
of the
simple.
easier parts about building a PC, but there are a couple things to be aware of. The first of which is that you have these 4 DIMM slots. At least on this motherboard, there are 4 DIMM slots that you would actually populate, and they can actually be covered or blocked if you have too big of an air CPU cooler. Now this one is fairly slim, so we're not running into any clearance issues, but you might have one that's too large and kind of encroaching on these leftmost DIMM slots, and that could be an issue. Hopefully, if yours is only encroached because there's a fan on the side, you should be able to pop the fan off, and it'll give you more open access to those DIMM slots, and then you can go ahead and install your memory modules. But if you are just running into some issues and there's no way around it, it's possible that you've just got some incompatible RAM that is just too tall. The heat spreaders on the RAM, which is the black enclosure that you see here, for example, is just too tall for the model of CPU cooler that you've purchased. You might want to look into that online, do some research to make sure that it is incompatible before you send things back and stuff, but that can occur from time to time. Assuming, though, that you don't have any clearance issues and that you have free access to all these DIMM slots, you want to consult your motherboard manual to find out which of these slots should be populated with your modules, because it does matter. It does matter. No matter if you have 1 stick or 4 sticks or 8 sticks, you want to make sure that you're putting them in the right slots. And the only way to find that out is through the manual. So once you've done that, I've already...
Yep. Read the manual. I know everybody hates reading, but you
Found
gotta.
out that mine,
You have to do it.
my 2 sticks that I have here should be going in the second and the fourth slot. So I've got that all figured out. So the next thing I want to do to actually install these suckers is I want to pull down these side latches. There's side latches on, in this instance, there's side latches on both sides of each DIMM slot. Some other boards only have a fold down latch on one side, and the other one is fixed. So that applies to you. Don't try to force one of the sides down. It's probably just not meant to move. But in this case, both of them fold down on either side. Now, before you install these suckers, you want to make note of the little notch that's the bottom of the module. You can see it right there. It's off-center, which means that these are keyed PCBs, which means they can only go in a certain way. So you want to match that notch up with the notch that's in the DIMM slot itself, just to ensure that you're plugging it in the right way. Otherwise, you
Notice how he's showing you everything?
The module. So once you've got that figured out, go ahead and line it up, and applying equal pressure on both sides of the stick.
Right.
You want to apply force downward until both of those side latches that you popped down earlier snap back into place. So we just did the first one. Let's do it again for this guy. Even pressure downward.
And notice how the RAM is spaced
voila.
out.
You can see that the latches,
That's
all four of the
proper dual
latches,
channel.
are completely upright where they were before. So memory installation complete. Very straightforward and simple. Let's move on to the next step. All right, we've got our case now. So go ahead and get your case out of the box. Be careful with it, especially if you've got something like the tempered glass side panel. It can be very fragile. And what we need to do is sort of prep our case so that we can fit our now prepped motherboard snugly inside of it. So I'm going to go ahead and take off this side panel. Now, if you guys have a more conventional side panel that's not tempered glass, you probably don't have these 4 thumb screws directly on the side. You probably have 2 thumb screws on the back or something similar, depending on the case. So go ahead and remove the side panel carefully. Be especially careful. I mean, whether or not you have tempered glass, you should still be careful if you have like an acrylic side panel window or something like that, because they can scratch very easily. I would advise leaving the plastic wrap on the side panel window until you're absolutely done, 100% complete with the build. I know it's tempting. I know it's tempting to peel it off the second you see it and go, ooh, ah! But trust me, you'll thank me later. It's not worth it. Now I'm also going to remove the back side panel, and you guys should too, just in case you find any accessories back there. A lot of times case vendors like to put the accessories inside of the case. They like to hide them either in the drive cage or in the power supply shroud somewhere. So go ahead and take your accessories out. You will be needing them very soon. In fact, right now. Let's go ahead and put the case on its side so that the main side is facing up and the back side is facing down. Boom. And here's where you want to bust out your motherboard I/O shield that I told you to remove from your motherboard box earlier. Take it out of the plastic wrapping, like so. It's like an ASMR video now. And you want to make sure that...
By the way, I'm going to leave a link to this video in the chat so you guys can watch it at your leisure. So, you know what? I'll let this go a little longer.
Properly.
Get to a certain point, and then I'm going to call it.
Inward of your case. And the really nice outside... or the really nice part is going to be
Never
outside,
used an MSI motherboard, by the way.
See it. And the way this goes, so you already know it's going to go either this way or this way, right? With the shiny side inside. Now it's just a matter of which way does that go. You can just line it up with your motherboard, or I can just tell you a rule of thumb. Where you see the little circles, all the little audio circles, that's going to go on the bottom, towards the bottom of the case. That's pretty much the best way to tell. And then just go ahead and pop it in. And this can be a little tricky. It's hard to know once you pop this in. And it's sort of, you have to kind of do it by feel and by sound. So you hear that? That was part of it popping in. And you want to just double check. You have to look really closely to make sure that the entire perimeter of your I/O shield is flush. So you just want to double check, push it firmly around the edges, make sure it's all good in there. All right, now before you get too excited and go about installing your motherboard, there's a couple things to mention here. First of which, if you are using an air CPU cooler tower sort of thing, like I am right here, then this doesn't really apply to you. But for those of you using liquid-cooled AIOs of any kind that have radiators and things like that, you want to make a note of whether or not it makes sense to install your motherboard first before you install your radiator. It can kind of depend. For the most part, I would say the rule of thumb is you install your motherboard first and then your radiator, but there are some instances where the reverse is true and makes more sense for that particular configuration. So you just want to sort of think it through. If you're not sure, maybe just look up in certain manuals to see what they suggest, or if it's not there, look online, but that is something to point out. The other important thing to note before you install your motherboard is that you have your motherboard standoffs installed. Now, NZXT has already done us the solid of pre-installing these, and these are these little metal pegs that are sticking out of the motherboard tray that give your motherboard a little bit of lift. It kind of prevents the trace layouts on the back of your motherboard making contact with the steel surface of the case itself to prevent any sort of shortages and things like that. So it's very important that you have these in place. Again, NZXT's already put them here, and if you're lucky, you'll actually get one in the middle, a peg in the middle that's it's got a little bit of a tit on it, a little bit of a lift off. It's a little bit taller than the other ones. It looks a little different than the other guys, and that's just so that you can have something to latch onto. There's obviously a hole in the middle of your motherboard that will latch onto that middle peg when you're putting it into place, and then just sort of lock it and freeze it so that it's easier to work with and more stable. It's not moving around and stuff. It's really nice to have one of those, but if you don't, no worries, you can still get by. Now, the other thing to be aware of is that not all standoffs should be in the same place for every situation. For example, these are in the ATX configuration for ATX motherboards, which I in fact have right now. So that's good. So I don't need to change anything here. But let's say you were building for some reason with a micro ATX motherboard and you needed to rearrange the standoffs to accommodate that particular form factor. You can either look in your case manual, or if it's not there, it could be etched directly onto the motherboard tray, where here it says, micro ATX, ATX, ITX, and it gives you sort of a legend, and you can figure out where the standoffs go for that particular form factor board. Now then, we can go ahead and mount our motherboard now that that's all out of the way. And I like to grab the motherboard by either side. I really try my best not to grab it by the CPU cooler. It's a bad habit of mine. I know I need to stop. And then I just sort of just push it in there gently. I look at the back of the motherboard or behind the case.
I'll leave it.
So I can align the I/O, the rear I/O, with the I/O shield. And then if all goes well, the middle peg, the lifted peg, will latch on. And voila, the motherboard's not installed yet. Don't put the case upright. It'll just probably fall out and something will break. We still need to screw it down. So we've got some screws here. You're going to want to get the accessories out that came with your case, with your chassis. And then with your hopefully metallic tip screwdriver. This is where the metallic
my
tip
skin is sticking to the chair.
You're just going to go ahead and screw those down. I should mention, when you're installing the standoffs underneath, you want to make sure to tighten them, but you don't want to over tighten them because they can strip and then they'll just like do the infinite spin, and that's not good because then these screws won't really go in at all. And then likewise, when you're screwing in these screws, you want to make them snug, but not too snug. Again, because you could strip them, and if you over tighten them, then removing them, when you remove them, you might actually pull out a standoff, or the standoff might come along with it, and that can be a pain sometimes to work around that. So you can expect with a standard ATX motherboard that you have to input about 8 or 9 of these screws. We only have to do 8 because the middle standoff is a raised one, but if yours is not raised and it looks like all the other ones, then you will have to put a 9th screw right there. And voila, now we can say our motherboard is properly installed. We can put the case up if we wanted to, which we're going to actually need to do now to install the power supply. Alright, so I've got my power supply here, and sure enough, it is partially modular, which means you have some of the essentials that are just hardwired into the power supply, and the accessories, or the peripheral cables, if you will, are separate. So you can plug these in as you see fit, depending on what devices you want connected, which is really nice. Helps clean up cable management a bit, because you're only connecting the cables that you need instead of everything and trying to find a place for the ones that you aren't using. So I've kind of already figured out which ones I need. The ones that are connected are the standard essentials that most people will be using anyway, which is your 24-pin ATX. This goes to your motherboard directly, as does the 8-pin EPS. This is the CPU connector. And then we've also got one for PCI Express. This is for your video card. We've actually got 2 8-pin connectors. These are 6+2 pin design. You can see that they kind of split off, and this is going to be plenty for our video card, so we don't need to add additional PCIe cables to this guy. What we do need are our peripheral cables. So we need some SATA cables here, both for our 2 drives. We do have an SSD and a mechanical hard drive that are SATA. They use SATA connectors, so we're going to need to power them with this SATA plug. You can see that there's actually 1, 2, 3, 4 SATA connectors on this one cable. So hopefully if we wire things properly, and this cable is long enough, we'll be able to wire both of those hard drives with one cable. 2 birds with 1 stone, so to speak. And then we've got one more of those. This is another SATA cable, exactly the same as SATA power. That is actually a little bit shorter, and there's only 2 connectors on this one, and this is going to be going to our NZXT Hue Plus. You may have other SATA-enabled devices that that need to be powered, such as, let's say, a built-in fan controller into your case. Or there's Molex as well. Molex is a completely different plug that did come included. We do have some Molex cables included with this power supply, but we don't have any Molex devices that are in this system, so we don't need to use those. The other thing is, the matter of which way do you want to install the power supply, I generally say face down, especially with cases now having ventilation slots at the bottom with dust filters, as this one does. If your case does not have any sort of ventilation at the bottom here where the power supply mount is, then I would say flip it up top. Otherwise, I would go to the bottom. Now, this is a bit of a unique layout. Actually, there's plenty of cases that do this, but the S340 Elite actually has this bracket on the back with removable thumb screws, which you still, for some reason, need a screwdriver to remove. That's silly. And this is what you want to attach to the power supply first before you install it.
Alright. Sorry guys, I'm gonna have to cut this short. I think I've bored you enough. Give me 1 second. Control. Copy. C. Alright, I just posted it in the chat, just so you guys can finish up the video at your leisure. But I think that's gonna be all for me tonight. I got a few things that I have to do tomorrow, so I gotta get ready for that. Thank you for joining me on this wonderful redo of episode 1 of the Doghouse. And I will see you in the next one. See you later.